The rain hammered against the windows of Miller's funeral home as I sat in the front row, staring at my father's casket. Tom Mitchell had been everything: father, mentor, and best friend, all rolled into one weathered farmer who smelled like diesel fuel and honest work. I should have been grieving properly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Behind me, I could hear my stepmother Carol whispering urgently to her two sons, Jake and Marcus. They'd only been part of our family for 3 years, ever since Dad married Carol when I was 19. Now, at 22, I was about to learn just how little that family bond meant to them. The service was simple, just like Dad would have wanted. Pastor Williams spoke about Dad's dedication to the land and his community. He mentioned how Tom Mitchell had built his farm from nothing, starting with a single tractor and expanding to 12 John Deere machines over 30 years of backbreaking work. After the burial, we gathered at the farmhouse for the reading of the will. I expected it to be straightforward. Dad had always told me the farm would be mine someday. He'd raised me on that land, taught me every inch of the operation, and made sure I knew how to handle everything from planting corn to maintaining the tractors. But as Lawyer Henderson cleared his throat and began reading, my world started crumbling. The will was dated just 6 months ago, long after Dad's cancer diagnosis. According to the document, Carol inherited the farmhouse and primary operations. Jake and Marcus got the tractors and equipment. I got the old shack at the edge of the property and a pile of debt. I sat there in stunned silence as my stepfamily exchanged satisfied glances. This couldn't be right. Dad wouldn't have done this to me. Chapter 2. The Betrayal. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast every day for 22 years, watching Carol pack up Dad's belongings like he'd never existed. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment for a long time. "You need to be out by the end of the week," she said without looking at me. "Jake and Marcus want to start implementing their new farming strategy, and having you around will just complicate." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Carol, this is my home. I've lived here my entire life. Dad built this place for his family," she interrupted, finally turning to face me. "And his family is me and my boys now. You're 22, Dave. It's time you learn to stand on your own feet instead of riding on your father's coattail." Jake wandered into the kitchen, already wearing one of Dad's John Deere caps like it belonged to him. "Don't worry, little brother," he said with a smirk that made my blood boil. "We'll take good care of the tractors. Dad always said they needed someone who really understood modern farming technique." The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake had never driven anything bigger than his pickup truck before moving here, while I'd been operating farm equipment since I was 12. But apparently, that didn't matter now. "What about the debt?" I asked, grasping for any leverage I could find. "The will says I inherited that too." Carol's smile was cold as winter. "That's right, about $40,000. The shack should cover it if you sell it, though you might need to find a job to make up the difference." I spent the rest of the day loading my belongings into Dad's old pickup, the one thing they'd apparently overlooked in their grab for assets. As I drove toward the shack that was now my only home, I couldn't stop thinking about how wrong this all felt. Chapter 3. The Shack. The shack sat on 5 acres at the far edge of the property, connected to the main farm by a dirt road that turned to mud every time it rained. Dad had built it in the early days as temporary housing while he constructed the main farmhouse. It hadn't been lived in for over 15 years. As I pushed open the warped wooden door, the smell of dust and neglect hit me like a physical blow. The single room was maybe 400 square feet, with a tiny kitchen area, a corner that could charitably be called a bathroom, and windows so dirty they barely let in light. I set my boxes down on the uneven wooden floor and tried not to let despair overwhelm me. This was it, my inheritance from a man who'd supposedly loved me, a shack that was falling apart, and debt that would take years to pay off. The floorboards creaked ominously under my weight as I walked around, taking inventory of what needed to be fixed just to make the place livable. The roof leaked in at least 3 places. The plumbing was questionable at best, and I was pretty sure I'd seen a family of mice scatter when I opened the door. But it was mine, and right now, that was all I had. I spent the first night on an air mattress, listening to the wind whistle through gaps in the walls, and trying to figure out what Dad had been thinking. Had Carol somehow manipulated him into changing the will? Had his cancer affected his judgment more than we'd realized? The questions kept me awake until dawn, when I finally accepted that I might never know the answers. All I could do was try to make the best of what I had, and figure out how to pay off the debt that came with it. Little did I know that the answers I sought were literally right beneath my feet. Chapter 4. Starting over. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of manual labor and growing desperation. I found a job at Henderson's Hardware in town, stocking shelves and helping customers for $12 an hour. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and it gave me enough to buy basic supplies for fixing up the shack. Every evening after work, I'd come home and tackle another repair project. I patched the roof with salvaged shingles, replaced broken windows with plywood until I could afford glass, and slowly made the place livable. The work kept my hands busy, but it couldn't quiet the anger that burned in my chest every time I saw Jake or Marcus driving one of Dad's tractors past my little corner of the property. They'd painted over Dad's name on the equipment and replaced it with Mitchell Brothers Farm, as if they'd built the operation themselves. It made me sick to watch them treat Dad's life's work like their personal playground. Carol had wasted no time in making changes to the main house either. She'd ripped out Mom's flower garden to make room for a swimming pool and painted over the barn, where Dad had carefully recorded the farm's history in faded pencil marks on the wooden walls. The worst part was how quickly the community seemed to accept the new arrangement. People in town would ask me how I was adjusting to the change, as if losing my home and inheritance was just a normal part of growing up. Some even suggested I should be grateful that Carol had given me anything at all, but there were a few people who remembered how things used to be. Old Pete from the feed store would shake his head whenever Jake came in asking basic questions about crop rotation. Mrs. Henderson from the hardware store would slip me extra supplies when she thought no one was looking. "Your daddy was a good man," she told me one afternoon. "This whole situation just doesn't sit right with me." It didn't sit right with me either, but what could I do about it? Chapter 5. The Discovery. 3 months after moving into the shack, I was finally making real progress on the renovations. The roof no longer leaked, the windows were all replaced, and I'd even managed to get the old wood stove working. The place was starting to feel less like a prison and more like a home. I was working on replacing some of the worst floorboards when my crowbar punched through a particularly rotten section and hit something that didn't sound like dirt. I knelt down and peered into the hole I'd created, using my phone's flashlight to illuminate the space beneath the floor. There was definitely something down there, something wrapped in what looked like oiled canvas. My heart started racing as I carefully widened the hole and reached down to retrieve the package. The canvas was old but well preserved, tied with string that crumbled at my touch. Inside was a metal document box, the kind lawyers use for important papers. My hands shook as I opened the latch. The first thing I saw was an envelope with my name written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. Beneath it were several official-looking documents, including what appeared to be a property deed. But it was the letter that caught my attention first. "David," it began, "if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and Carol has probably tried to take everything. I hope you'll forgive an old man for not trusting his wife, but I learned some things about her and her boys that made me realize I needed to protect what I'd built for you." My hands trembled as I continued reading. Dad had discovered that Carol and her sons were planning to contest his original will and claim the farm for themselves. So he'd hidden his real will, the one that left everything to me, and created a fake one to throw them off the scent. But the real bombshell was in the deed I found beneath the letter. The land the shack sat on wasn't just 5 acres like I'd thought. It was 50 acres, including the mineral rights and water rights for the entire property. Chapter 6. The Truth Revealed. I read Dad's letter 3 times before the full implications sank in. He'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, and he'd been planning his moves long before anyone realized the game had started. According to the letter, Dad had started suspecting Carol's motives about a year before his death. He'd overheard her on the phone with someone, discussing how much the farm would be worth if it were sold and developed. That conversation had prompted him to do some investigating of his own. What he'd discovered was that Carol had been married twice before, and both previous husbands had died under suspicious circumstances, leaving her substantial inheritance. Jake and Marcus weren't just her sons, they were her partners in what amounted to a family business of marrying wealthy older men and inheriting their assets. Dad had been too proud to confront them directly, but he'd been smart enough to protect me. The fake will had been designed to make them think they'd won while giving me the real prize, the land that held the farm's true value. The deed revealed that the 50 acres included not just the mineral and water rights, but also an easement that controlled access to the main farm. Without my permission, Carol and her sons couldn't legally operate their farming business. Every time they drove a tractor across my land to reach their fields, they were technically trespassing. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. Attached to the deed was a geological survey that Dad had commissioned 6 months before his death. The land beneath the shack contained a significant limestone deposit that a local quarry company had been trying to purchase for years. The survey estimated the value of the mineral rights at over $2 million. I sat on the floor of the shack, surrounded by the documents that would change everything, and finally understood why Dad had been smiling. He'd known that justice would eventually be served, even if he wouldn't be around to see it. Chapter 7. Legal Consultation. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove straight to the law office of Patricia Reeves, the only attorney in town who wasn't connected to the Henderson firm that had handled Dad's fake will. I'd heard she was tough, fair, and didn't back down from a fight. Ms. Reeves was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to see right through. I spread Dad's documents across her desk and watched her expression change from polite interest to sharp focus as she read through everything. "This is quite a situation you found yourself in," she said after reviewing all the papers. "Your father was clearly a very intelligent man who understood exactly what he was up against." She explained that the fake will Carol had used was technically legal, but it had been superseded by the real will I'd found, which was properly witnessed and notarized. More importantly, the deed to the 50 acres was ironclad and had been filed with the county recorder's office years before Dad's marriage to Carol. "The question is, Ms. Reeves continued, how do you want to handle this? We could simply file the real will and deed with the court and let the chips fall where they may, or we could be more strategic about it." I thought about all the humiliation I'd endured over the past 3 months, watching Jake and Marcus parade around in Dad's equipment while treating me like an unwelcome guest on my own family's. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. Ms. Reeves smiled, and for the first time since Dad's funeral, I felt like I had an ally. "Well, they've been operating that farm for 3 months without legal access to half their fields. That's a lot of trespassing violations. And if they've been selling crops grown on land they don't own." The implications were staggering. Not only could I reclaim everything Dad had left me, but Carol and her sons could face serious legal consequences for their actions. "How long will this take?" I asked. "Give me a week to prepare the paperwork and verify everything with the county. Then we'll pay your stepfamily a visit they'll never forget." Chapter 8. The Confrontation. A week later, I drove up to the farmhouse with Ms. Reeves following in her car. It was a Tuesday morning, and I could see Jake and Marcus working on one of the tractors in the barn. Carol was hanging laundry on the line, looking every bit the picture of domestic contentment that was about to change. I knocked on the front door of the house where I'd grown up, feeling strange about having to announce myself in what should have been my own home. Carol answered with a look of annoyance that quickly turned to suspicion when she saw the lawyer behind me. "David, what's this about? I hope you're not here to cause trouble. We need to talk," I said, stepping past her into the living room. "All of you." Jake and Marcus came in from the barn, their hands still dirty from working on the tractor. They looked confident, almost amused, as if they thought I was there to beg for some kind of concession. Ms. Reeves set her briefcase on the coffee table and pulled out a stack of documents. "I'm Patricia Reeves, representing David Mitchell in a matter concerning this property. We have some information that's going to change your understanding of the current situation." Carol's face went pale as Ms. Reeves began explaining about the real will and the deed to the 50 acres. Jake and Marcus exchanged worried glances as the lawyer detailed their trespassing violations and the potential criminal charges they could face. "This is ridiculous," Carol sputtered. "That will was properly executed and witnessed. You can't just come in here with some papers you found and—" "Actually, we can," Ms. Reeves interrupted. "These documents have been verified by the county recorder's office. The deed David found has been on file for over 20 years. Your husband never owned the land you've been farming on." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock Dad had built himself. I watched as the reality of their situation sank in. "What do you want?" Carol asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Chapter 9. Justice Served. I looked around the living room where I'd spent countless evenings with Dad, planning the next day's work or just talking about. These people had tried to steal not just my inheritance, but my memories and my future. Now it was time for them to face the consequences. "First," I said, "you're going to return every piece of equipment, every dollar of profit, and every asset that belonged to my father. The tractors, the livestock, the bank accounts, all of it." Jake started to protest, but Ms. Reeves cut him off. "Your alternative is criminal prosecution for theft, fraud, and trespassing. The district attorney is very interested in this case, especially given Mrs. Mitchell's history with previous husbands." Carol's face went white as a sheet. Apparently, Dad's investigation had been even more thorough than I'd realized. "Second," I continued, "you have 30 days to vacate the farmhouse and find somewhere else to live. The real will leaves the entire operation to me, and I want you gone. You can't just throw us out," Marcus said, speaking for the first time. "We've put work into this place. We've made improvements. Improvements that you made to property you were stealing," Ms. Reeves replied. "You're lucky David isn't demanding compensation for the unauthorized use of his land." But I wasn't done yet. The geological survey had given me an idea that would ensure they never bothered me again. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out the survey report. "The land you've been farming contains mineral deposits worth over $2 million. A quarry company has been trying to buy the rights for years. I think it's time I gave them a call." The implication was clear. If they fought me on this, I would sell the mineral rights and their precious farmland would become a limestone quarry. They could either accept my terms and leave quietly, or they could lose everything anyway when the mining operation began. Carol looked like she was going to be sick. "You're just like your father," she said bitterly, "stubborn and vindictive." "No," I replied. "I'm exactly like my father. He taught me to work hard, be honest, and protect what's mine. Chapter 10. Reclaiming everything. The next month was a whirlwind of activity as I worked with Ms. Reeves to legally reclaim everything that had been stolen. The process was complicated by the fact that Jake and Marcus had already sold some of the crops they'd harvested, but we managed to trace the money and recover most of it. The tractors were the hardest part to stomach. They'd been repainted and modified, with Dad's careful maintenance records thrown away and replaced with their own haphazard system. It took weeks to restore them to proper working condition, but I was determined to honor Dad's memory by taking care of his equipment the way he'd taught me. Carol and her sons fought the eviction at first, hiring their own lawyer and claiming they'd made improvements to the property that entitled them to compensation. But when Ms. Reeves presented evidence of Carol's previous marriages and the suspicious circumstances surrounding her former husband's deaths, they quickly changed their tune. The day they moved out was one of the most satisfying of my life. I stood on the front porch of the farmhouse, my farmhouse now, and watched them load their belongings into a rented truck. Carol wouldn't even look at me, but Jake made sure to slam the truck door extra hard when he was done. "This isn't over," he called out as they drove away. "We'll find a way to fight this." But I knew they wouldn't. Ms. Reeves had made it clear that any further legal action on their part would result in criminal charges being filed. They were beaten, and they knew it. That evening, I walked through the house where I'd grown up, seeing it with new eyes. It would take time to undo all the changes Carol had made, but I was looking forward to the world. This was my home again, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. The first thing I did was replant Mom's flower garden exactly where it had been before Carol destroyed it. Chapter 11. The Quarry Decision. With the farm legally mine again and Carol's family gone, I had to make the biggest decision of my life. The quarry company had indeed been trying to purchase the mineral rights for years, and their latest offer was even higher than the geological survey had estimated. $8 million for a 20-year mining lease. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having, enough to pay off all the debt, modernize the farm operation, and set myself up for life. But it would also mean destroying 50 acres of land that had been in my family for generations. I spent weeks walking those acres, remembering all the times Dad and I had worked that soil together. He'd taught me to drive on the old dirt roads that crisscrossed the property. We'd hunted deer in the small woods at the eastern edge. Some of my best memories with him were tied to that land, but I also remembered what he'd written in his letter about protecting what he'd built for me. Maybe he'd known about the mineral rights all along. Maybe this was his way of giving me the choice between honoring the past and securing the future. I called a meeting with the quarry company representatives and Ms. Reeves to discuss the terms. The company was willing to limit the mining to the areas with the richest deposits, leaving about 20 acres untouched. They'd also agreed to restore the land when the lease expired, though it would never be the same. "It's your decision," Ms. Reeves told me after the meeting, "but that money would give you the freedom to run this farm exactly the way you want to, without worrying about debt or market fluctuations." She was right. The mining lease would provide enough income to modernize the entire operation, buy new equipment, and ensure that the farm could support not just me, but potentially my own children someday. In the end, it was thinking about Dad that helped me make the decision. He'd always been practical above all else, willing to make hard choices to protect his family's future. Chapter 12. New Beginnings. I signed the mining lease on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Dad's funeral. The quarry company would begin operations in the spring, but they'd agreed to let me harvest one final crop from the land that would be mined. With the lease money in the bank, I was able to pay off all the debt and still have enough left over to completely modernize the farm up. I bought 3 new John Deere tractors to replace the oldest ones in Dad's fleet, installed a state-of-the-art irrigation, and built a new storage facility. But the best part was being able to hire help. I brought on 2 full-time workers and a part-time bookkeeper, which meant I could focus on the parts of farming I loved most, working the land and planning for the future. The community's attitude toward me changed dramatically once word got out about what had really happened, the inheritance. People who had treated me like a charity case suddenly remembered that I was Tom Mitchell's son, raised on this land and trained in every aspect of the operation. Old Pete from the feed store started asking my advice on crop rotation again. Mrs. Henderson stopped slipping me free supplies and started treating me like the successful businessman I'd become. Even Pastor Williams mentioned the situation in one of his sermons, talking about how truth has a way of coming to light. The farmhouse felt like home again. I'd restored Mom's flower garden and repainted the barn, carefully preserving Dad's pencil marks that recorded the farm's history. I even found some of his old John Deere caps in a box Carol had missed, and wearing them made me feel connected to him in a way I hadn't experienced since his death. But the most satisfying moment came when I drove past the shack where I'd spent those difficult months after the funeral. I'd decided to keep it as a reminder of how far I'd come and how much Dad had sacrificed to protect my future. Chapter 13. Full Circle. 2 years later, I stood in the same spot where I'd discovered Dad's hidden documents, But everything had changed. The shack had been renovated into a comfortable guest house, and the mining operation had transformed the eastern section of the property into a productive quarry that provided steady income. The farm was thriving beyond anything Dad could have imagined. We were growing corn, soybeans, and wheat on 500 acres of prime farmland, and the operation was profitable enough to support 3 families. I'd even started dating Sarah, a veterinarian from the next county, who understood the demands of agricultural life. But the most important change was in my understanding of what Dad had really left me. It wasn't just land or money or equipment. It was the knowledge that family isn't always about blood, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones you need to protect yourself from most. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to value hard work over easy money, and to never take for granted the things that really matter. Dad's hidden deed had given me back my inheritance, but his letter had given me something even more valuable: the wisdom to appreciate what I had and the strength to fight for what was right. Every morning when I walked out to check on the tractors, I could almost hear Dad's voice in the reminding me to take care of the land, and it would take care of me. The 12 John Deere tractors sat in the barn where they belonged, maintained with the same care and attention Dad had taught me. Carol and her sons had disappeared completely after leaving the farm. I'd heard rumors that they'd moved to another state, probably looking for their next victim. I didn't wish them harm, but I was grateful they were no longer my problem. The shack still held Dad's secret, but now it held mine too. The knowledge that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst losses, and that love finds a way to protect us even when we think we're completely alone. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It's been quite a journey from that devastating day at the funeral to where I am now, and I'm grateful I could share it with you. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from, and if you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life tales of family, justice, and unexpected discoveries. Your support means everything to me, and I look forward to sharing more stories with you soon.